Now we're going to take a look at brush tools and brush settings. And brush settings are pretty common and important inside of Photoshop, not just for the brush tool, but for other tools too, because you can use a lot of the brush settings with different types of tools like the eraser tool or when you're painting in, say, the mask mode. But let's just go ahead and take a look at the basics of the brush tools and how they work. So here we have an image, it's notepad.jpg, or if you're following along, notepad.psd. It's 1920 by 1146 at 300 pixels per inch. So this is for print, and we have a nice pixel resolution, so it'll be nice to color and draw on. And let's just go ahead and zoom in one time. So we're at 100% here, and this will just give us a little more room to color and mess around. So let's go ahead and select the brush tool on the left hand side with the shortcut key B, and it says Paints Custom Brush Strokes. Now if you hold it down, there's some other tools in here. We're going to specifically just look at the brush tool for now, but we also have the pencil tool, which will be more of pixels instead of brushing, and then there's a color replacement tool and a mixer brush tool. But let's just start with the basic brush tool, and we can go over here and we can just select a color, and if you look at the swatches in the bottom left hand side, the foreground color set to black, and we can just click and drag and start painting and go ahead and start coloring our image. I'll go ahead and undo that, and this is a great way to go ahead and make edits to your image or start designing or painting. If you're into doing things like watercoloring, you could totally do that here. Now I have a tablet, I have a Wacom tablet that I use, and I suggest that if you're doing a lot of painting and texturing and coloring, whether it be for images or for 3D graphics or for anything really, you might want to pick up a tablet because it gives you a lot more control. So if I pick up my tablet, now it's like I'm using an actual pen to color, and I have a lot more control over what I'm doing. And the great thing about tablets is they provide pressure sensitivity. So if I go real light, it'll make it nice and small. And then if I push down and go hard, it'll make it a little thicker and bigger. And you can change all those settings with the tablet. We won't get into that right now, but let's just go ahead and take a look at some of these settings. So I'm going to undo those. And at the top, we have our options bar here with all of our different settings. Of course, we have the tool and the tool presets that we can have, and then we have our brushes. Now this says 66 with this little circle. If I click on the drop down arrow, you can see what's going on here. This is our actual brush. So we have a size of 66 pixels. That's how big this is. And if we raise or lower that, you can see that it gets bigger or smaller. So we'll go ahead and turn that down a little bit. And if I click over here and get out of that toolbar, you can actually use the bracket keys to make your brush bigger or smaller too. That's a fast way to change that out if you don't want to use that menu every time. But whenever I do that, you can see the numbers are changing right there. So it's 200, and if I make it smaller, it's 80. So we can change the actual pixel size of our brush and make it smaller and have more fine-tuned control. So I'm going to undo those, and let's go ahead and look at those options again. We'll just bump that back up. And then we have hardness. This is how hard or soft the outside of that brush is. So if we're at 100%, we have a very hard, rigid side. And if we have 0%, that's the softest side that we have here. So let's undo those, and we'll take a look at some more options. Then we have some different preset brushes that we can use, some that are pretty common, and you can add more to these. You can download brushes from Photoshop and other websites and have a whole different array of brushes. So here we have this brush here that looks like a bunch of little dashes, and when I paint, it gives us this effect. So as you can see very quickly, you have a lot of control with all the different brushes that you could have and download. I've even used brushes before of things like birds, where when you brush across, it looks like a bunch of birds are coming onto the paper. Things like that make it very awesome and convenient. And if you check your CCC subscription, you can see all the different brushes that they have in store for you. Here we have scattered maple leaves, this is kind of like the bird one that I'm talking about. Whenever I drop that down, it puts a bunch of leaves down, and we can change the settings on how they scatter and how big they are and so forth. We'll get a little more into the advanced brush settings in some later tutorials, but that is how you can change your brush. And then we have our commonly used brushes here, and our presets, we'll just go to the basic one that we had. We also have this little icon here, which when you click that, it'll open up the brush settings tab and the brushes. So here you can see your options a lot easier. You can also access this by going to Window and hitting brush settings or brushes. It'll open it up as a group, or hitting the F5 key if you're using brushes often. And it just gives you a little more room to come in here and pick your brushes, and then you can change things like its scattering, the texture, noise, and all kinds of different things. Again, we'll go into a little more detail with these later on. So I'll close that out. Then we have our mode, which is basically how it's blending. We'll talk about blending modes later on, but you can change how it either darkens the image or lightens the image. It causes an overlay or a difference and so forth. You can change its opacity. So if you bring this down and you start drawing, you're actually going to have a lighter, more opaque brush, which is something you'll probably want. You can also change the things like the pressure sensitivity of the tablet. So here we have our flow and our smoothing. This is basically going to edit how our tablet reacts whenever we're painting. We have smoothing for the smoothing of the brush, basically showing how smooth it is going from stroke to stroke. So let me just grab my tablet here and I'll paint, and I have a nice smooth stroke, so whenever I'm painting, the edges stay nice and smooth. They're not very rigid. If I turn that all the way down, you can see that it just goes a lot faster, and the strokes are a little more rigid than they were before. So let's go ahead and change that back to 10%. And then we also have some settings that we can add on here. We'll talk about all this a little later on. And then finally, the ability to use pressure for size whenever you're using your Wacom tablet. So these are all based on the tablet, which we'll cover a little more in the advanced lessons for these topics. But what I wanted to talk about is not only are you going to be able to use your brush just for the brush tool, but you're also going to use it for other tools too. You'll have these options. So for instance, if we go to the toolbar and we go to the eraser tool, which is E, not only can you just erase like circles on your image, but you have all those same brushes that you could use with the eraser tool. So if I go to Windows and I go to my brush settings, just so we can see this a little better, and let's just pick a brush. Let's say we pick that scattered maple leaves. Well, now what we're doing is we are erasing, but we're erasing with those leaves. So different tools inside of Photoshop are allowing you to use the different brushes. Same with editing in mask mode. I can edit in mask mode and do the same thing with the different leaves and brushes that we have. Now, a little bit later on, when we start going through the different tool sections and getting really detailed information on these different tools and the individual brushes, I'll go a little more in depth on how to use these properties and how you can use them. But I just wanted to go ahead and give you a brief study of the different ways that brushes are used inside of Photoshop so that you can begin experimenting with them, either painting or drawing or using them however you see fit.